My name is Pastor Hal York, and welcome to Truth in the Trenches. Today we're going to be Proverbs chapter 11, verses 5 and 6 and 8, where we read, "The righteousness of the blameless will smooth his way, but the wicked will fall by his own wickedness. The righteousness of the upright will deliver them, but the treacherous will be caught by their own greed. The righteous is delivered from trouble, but the wicked takes his place." It's sort of similar to Proverbs 26:27. Whoever digs a pit will fall into it, and a stone will come back on him who starts it rolling. We see this contrast between the righteous and the wicked throughout the book of Proverbs. As I was reading this story, of these verses, a story came to mind that powerfully illustrates the truth of these verses. There are many such illustrations in Scripture that would do so, but this one is a classic, and it's found in the book of Esther. You probably know the story. If there ever was a biblical Hitler, it was Haman, an egomaniac and a man with an insane determination to extinguish the Hebrew people. We read the story about Haman and Esther in chapters 2 through 7. I obviously won't read the whole story, but let me summarize it for you quickly. The players in the story are Mordecai, Haman, Ahasuerus the king, and Esther. It tells us in chapter 2, verse 11, that every day Mordecai walked back and forth in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and how she fared. And Esther was going to become the queen of Ahasuerus, the king, and you can read about that in chapters 1 and 2. But Esther is a Jew, but she has not revealed her kindred or her people to the king at this point. But as the story goes on, one day in the courtyard, Mordecai overhears a plot by some disgruntled employees of the king who wanted to kill him. The king, that is. And he reports this to Esther, and she tells the king, and these men are executed. And nothing more is said of the event. It's kind of put in the files, and in the dusty place where they keep all the records is probably placed there and never to be read again, you would think. But chapter 3, Haman has developed a hate-on for this Jew, Mordecai, because after he was promoted by the king, everyone in the kingdom bowed, or the king's court bowed down and paid homage to Haman except Mordecai. And Haman's hatred escalates to the point where he wants not only to destroy Mordecai, but he wants to destroy all the Jewish people. And so Haman takes this devious plot to the king, but he does not tell the king the whole story. In chapter 3, verse 8, "Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there was a certain people." There was a certain people, he says. He doesn't tell them who they are. Their laws are different. They don't obey the king's law, so it would be in the best interest of the king to exterminate them. Well, the king agrees to the suggestion, still not knowing who this group of people are he's referring to. But the edict is signed, and on a date set forth in the edict, all these certain people will be executed. Well, in chapter 4, Mordecai learns of this plot, and he goes into mourning wearing sackcloth. And Esther seeks to find out what's wrong with him, but he would not be comforted. So she asks why. And Mordecai reveals to Esther Haman's plans to destroy her people, Mordecai included. So Esther plans a banquet, invites the king and Haman. And Haman leaves pleased as punch that he's been invited to such a prestigious gala. But Haman, on his way home, in chapter 5, sees Mordecai again, and once again he does not bow down. And Haman is filled with rage and goes home. And in verse 15, he tells his wife his sad, sad story. And his friends and his wife tell him to listen, build a gallows and ask the king to have Mordecai hung on it the next day. And that was music to his ears. It's exactly what he wanted to hear, so he does exactly that. But chapter 6, that night the king has trouble sleeping, and he wants something to read. And some old records are pulled out, guaranteed to put anyone to sleep, and they are read to the king. Now, only God could do this. The particular records that happened to be read that night is about the plot against the king's life and what Mordecai had done to avert it. The king obviously had not been informed to the details of this, so he asked, has he been rewarded? Mordecai had been rewarded or acknowledged, and the answer was no. So later on in chapter 6, Haman comes into work in the morning, and verse 6 we read, "The king's servant said to him, behold, Haman is standing in the court. And the king said, let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king said to him, what is to be done for the man who the king desires to honor? And Haman said to himself, whom would the king desire to honor more than me? And then Haman said to the king, for the man that the king desires to honor, let him bring a royal robe, which the king had worn, and so on, all the way down to verse 9. And then the jaw drop verse for Haman. Then in verse 10, the king said to Haman, take quickly the robes and the horse, as you have said, and do for Mordecai the Jew, who is sitting on the king's gate. Do not fall short in anything that I have told you. So Haman took the robe and the horse and arrayed Mordecai and led him on horseback to the city square and proclaimed before the king, thus it shall be done to the man whom the king desires to honor. But Haman returned home mourning, as you can imagine. It's almost comical. But this party that they've been invited to happens in chapter 7. And in that party, the king asks Esther to tell him what's on her mind. And Esther tells the king about the plot to destroy her people. And the king asks, who would presume to do this? In verse 6. And Esther said, a foe and an enemy is this wicked Haman. And then Haman became terrified before the king and queen. The stone that Haman started rolling is going to roll back on him. The king arose in his anger, verse 7, from drinking wine and went into the palace garden, but Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for she saw what harm had been determined against him by the king, for he saw that. Then the king said, will he even assault the queen? Verse 5. And then Harbona, one of the eunuchs who were before the king, said, behold, indeed, the gallows standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of the king. And the king said, hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows which he had prepared for Mordecai, and the king's anger subsided. Those things clearly demonstrated in Haman's life the very gallows he built for Mordecai and the honor he sought for himself did not pan out like he planned. What did we read earlier? This very thing. Haman was disgraced and Mordecai honored. The wicked man was disgraced, the righteous honored and protected. And the gallows he built for the Jewish people, he was hanged on himself. What a glorious demonstration of the providence and power of God. We see that God is not mocked, that God will protect his people, even in exile. Do you see how these verses apply to the story and many others in the Bible? The righteousness of the blameless will smooth his way, but the wicked will fall by his own wickedness. The righteousness of the upright will deliver them, but the treacherous will be caught by their own greed. The righteous is delivered from trouble, but the wicked takes his place. That principle still stands true. The Lord blesses the righteous. The Lord will take care of the righteous. It's true in your life. It's true in my life. It's true in every believer's life. And so may this truth encourage us today as we think about these verses and to realize that it's not just a principle. It's a truth that comes to bear in real life, in real time, in your life, in my life. God is not mocked, and God will take care of his people. So may this truth guide us and guard us in the trenches of life which we seek to live our lives for the glory of God and the good of others. May God bless.